Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Johnson, presenting the scenario for Acme Gym and Equipment, which is a B2C, B2B fitness equipment sales company and fitness services company operating globally. Their objectives are to replace the regional systems acquired through multiple acquisitions with a phased rollout per region, thereby reducing the total cost of ownership and unify on a single Salesforce platform. Some of the risks identified in the scenario are strategic with regards to the requirements being missed and some misalignment between stakeholders. What we're going to do is implement a 3+1 governance strategy where a steering committee aligns with the PMO and the COE on an MVP, where an MVP is what will be delivered. That includes stories that match the definition of ready and then are evaluated against the definition of done. Another risk is the control risk to do with the developers overriding in production. Given the fact that they do not have a branching strategy, we're going to first implement a CI/CD pipeline as well as CI/CD gates around deployments into production. And then, of course, they will be able to create their own branches and create pull requests with those against a trunk. Another risk is the compliance, given that they are operating globally and including in Europe. There's GDPR regulations and compliance that will need to be adhered to. This will be mitigated using Shield, specifically using the privacy center so that individual end users can define and have access to their data using the data privacy regulations. The final risk identified is to do with data, specifically with regards to the large data volumes that are inherent to the solution. And I'll talk further about that in the data migration, but those are in field history. There's also a risk around the case object, specifically given the fact that there's 22 million growth per year, and payments, given the fact that for my calculations, there will be 132 million payment records in Salesforce in 2 years with the solution rolled out. These will be mitigated using Salesforce Archive, big objects, skinny tables for accounts, indexing for records that are within Salesforce, and we'll be tracking the limits using the out-of-box features, and also reducing the field history tracking for the objects to 10 fields per object. Okay, some of the assumptions I made in the scenario are that Acme product will be the payment gateway that will integrate with Chargent, which is a Salesforce managed package for the payment. Some of the roles within the solution are the system roles are Salesforce will act as a system of engagement and system of record for the CRM data. So that includes account, cases, opportunities, quotes. And then the ERP will act as a system of record for orders and invoice data. We'll be decommissioning and migrating data from the Salesforce Germany system, which has a couple of anti-patterns, which will be mitigated by the replacement with a Salesforce solution. We're going to be decommissioning Siebel cases and migrating those into Salesforce, and the Acme solution will be replaced by Salesforce product master data. We're replatforming their health tracker system to Heroku, which will act as the infrastructure for the app itself. Okay. Moving on now to the actors and licenses, starting with the internal users, internal actors, which include the project manager and the product manager. Starting with the product manager, we have the sales license for their access to opportunities and quotes. They will be operating within the regional territory per region. The regional manager will receive the Sales Cloud and Service Cloud license for access to all of the Service Cloud and Sales Cloud objects, and will be operating as well within the region territory. Per region territory, sales managers will receive the Sales Cloud license for access to opportunities and quotes. They'll be operating per country regions, and they'll be below the regional manager in the role hierarchy. Equipment sales specialists will exist below the sales manager, will receive the Sales Cloud license for access to opportunities and quotes, and they won't be within a territory. They'll be based on the countries that they're based within, so they'll be within the countries. And then service rep will receive Service Cloud license as well as Salesforce Voice for the inbound calls and the case objects, in this case dispatch, the omni-channel dispatcher console and the management there. Okay, and they'll exist below the regional manager in the role hierarchy. Moving on now to the external licenses, we have the reseller, which will receive partner community license for access to opportunities and quotes. We have the corporate customer buyers that will receive Customer Community Plus for the delegated administration of their own accounts users. The household customers will receive Customer Community License for access to their own records. Trainers will receive Customer Community Plus license plus scheduler license for the scheduling feature for the scheduled sessions, as well as access to the fitness data, so advanced sharing. Logistics fleets will receive the Customer Community license as well, but they will access for the training compliance operations, as well as access to the shipment records via the advanced sharings inherent to Customer Community Plus license. Moving on to the system landscape. We have a single production org with multi-currency enabled and multi-language via the custom labels, as well as Visualforce email templates. Furthermore, we're going to be translating metadata using a translation workbench with a single translation point of context for the metadata translations. Within the single production org, we have Salesforce Voice for the outbound and inbound calls, digital engagement for the custom communities, including SMS and live chat. Salesforce surveys will be leveraged for post-sales feedback. Salesforce scheduler will be leveraged for those training sessions. And Shield will be leveraged for the privacy center in compliance with GDPR regulations. Chargeant will be integrated with the Acme payment system. The Acme payment system acts as a payment gateway. Chargeant sends in transactions to the payment gateway to the payment gateway, which is Acme Payment, to process the transaction and return a transaction status back to Chargeant, which manifests itself in using the Chargeant objects, including transaction and the order objects. Salesforce Voice integrates with Amazon Connect as a telephony provider, and this is a CTI solution. And the Acme training tracker integrates with Salesforce using a Canvas embedded view within Salesforce, and then that's exposed within Salesforce for the training of the internal users. Internal users themselves authenticate to Salesforce using SAML via Okta, which is backed by Active Directory Identity Store. Currently, the Active Directory Identity Store operates only within the United States and Canada, but we'll be migrating the rest of the countries into this single Active Directory store for internal authentication. External users authenticate using OID via an auth provider, which validates the ID token returned by Google, Facebook, and Twitter. The customer app, the external users will authenticate to the customer app using OIDC, and the app itself authorizes using auth code plus Pixie Flow. There'll be two portals. The two portals are the customer portal, which external users will authenticate using OIDC, which is social sign-on. And the partners and trainer portal will also be exposed, and they will be using in the native credentials with Salesforce to authenticate there. We take an API-led approach to integrations connecting systems using reusable APIs, managed by an ESB, and secured by a job-based trust model here. Furthermore, we have an ETL that facilitates the migration of the data from these legacy decommissioning systems into Salesforce. And then furthermore, we integrate Heroku via Salesforce Connect and Heroku Postgres database via Salesforce Connect to Salesforce. And we're rehosting the health tracker back to Heroku to scale the health tracker app for the increased usage of the app and to ensure that the app is stable. Move on now to the requirements. Starting with the reseller onboarding. So the resellers will onboard using a registration link that is hosted on the website. That registration link will direct the reseller to a partner onboarding form that they'll fill out some basic data. That registration handler will then create a partner community user plus an account and contact for the reseller, which is represented here on the ERD. Then they'll access the partner portal. Once they have a user, they'll access the partner portal, which will include an application screen flow where they'll be putting in the 100 inputs, and then will then feed into a case record, which represents then the application itself that looks up to their account itself. So there will be a case record that represents the application, that will be the lifecycle record for the application as it goes through the sales to the sales manager initially. Once the case is created, which is the application, it's assigned to a sales manager. The sales manager owns the case itself via the Omni flow that is triggered by the case being marked as pending approval. That Omni flow routes the case to the application/case to a queue, which is per location. The queue then assigns it to a sales manager based on the sales manager's availability. The sales manager owns then the case itself. Once the case is assigned, the sales manager can update the case team with their own equipment sales specialist to grant them access to the record. Once the case has access, and once their team has access, they are able to track all conversations directly on the case object via the related email message object. That related email message includes the communication. Furthermore, we're going to enable live chat and voice calls using live chat, using digital engagement, using the related messaging session object, and voice calls using Salesforce Voice for these individuals. Equipment sales specialists will only be able to access within a certain IP range. We're going to make sure that that's the case using IP allow listing for the ESS profile. And if the reseller wants to chat with the sales manager, they can do so using digital engagement, which stores messages using this messaging session object. That messaging session object then looks up to the case, which then looks up to the customer's account record. The applications go through a series of statuses using the case status object, and that is visible on the layout itself. If the financial system is not per the minimum requirement, which is tracked on the customer metadata, then it will go through an approval process, which includes the regional manager. The regional manager will be assigned using the approval process work item related object, and then the regional manager will update the status of the case to pending signature once they approved it. Once it's approved, the case is marked with pending signature, which triggers a record trigger flow that creates the DocuSign envelope. The DocuSign envelope is then emailed to the reseller primary contact that is on the related to the reseller account. When the reseller receives the DocuSign envelope and signs it, there will be a record triggered flow on update of the envelope that updates the user's, that primary contact's record with permission sets to allow them access to the page for the opportunities and quotes, and also object access for those object access for the opportunity quote objects as well, so that they are only able to access once they have signed the contract. Once the reseller has been onboarded and there's a contract that's been signed, they'll have access as well they must complete training in the Acme training tracker. They'll access the Acme training tracker as a Salesforce user using that Canvas app. In Canvas, the Canvas app will be a service provider with Salesforce as the entity provider. Salesforce will pass an ML assertion response to the Acme training tracker for the the reseller to authenticate to the Canvas app. And then for any training tracker data that needs to be submitted back into Salesforce, it will use the REST OAuth tokens for the authentication of the Canvas app, and then that will then integrate back into Salesforce using a request and reply pattern with the training data. The training data itself it updates their contact record with the fact that they have completed the training. Resellers are able to then, once they've been trained and it's validated that they've completed the training, they're able to then create quotes within the solution using valid product combinations that come from that Acme product system. Those valid product combinations and discount limits are stored within Salesforce via metadata. So those are custom metadata. Those discount limits are also stored on the price book entries. So the combinations are stored as metadata, and then the discount limits are stored per price book entry. When they submit within the screen flow, it will validate based on the product rules in the metadata, and also ensure on the product price book entry that the discount is below the floor. If it is below the floor, then it blocks the submission of within the screen flow. Once they're done with the screen flow, once they've finished it, it will then create a quote with the quote line items that is owned by then the reseller. Once the reseller has created the quote, they can generate a PDF using the out-of-the-box features and email quote to the customer. The terms can be stored. If there's any custom terms, they can be stored actually on the quote line item object, which is a control by parent object related to the quote. And the sales manager can continuously monitor the deals in progress, and also their manager they are the owner of the account and have access implicitly to the opportunity and to the quote object. They'll be tracking the opportunity. They'll be tracking the opportunities in progress. The quotes are negotiated though between the customer and the reseller. Role hierarchy will grant then access to the manager for their reporting and visibility. If during the quoting process they decide that they want to divide the total amount in 12 or 24 months, they can pick on the quote object, it's the record itself on the quote, to either pay in a lump or 12 and 24 months, which will then, when they do submit the quote, calculate the adjusted total on the quote itself for the creation of the chargent records that are for the payment tracking. Project managers have access to the deals related to the product based on the fact that the product object itself has a lookup to a hierarchical lookup to the product manager. And there will be furthermore the creation of a public group with the product manager user on it. And so whenever the product lookup, whenever that product hierarchical lookup to the user changes, that public group's user changes as well. And then whenever an opportunity line item gets created with a product that is corresponding to one of the public groups, there will be an opportunity share record that's created with the public group so that the user has access. We're choosing to use a public group here instead of using just sharing directly with the user, so that there's flexibility in the product lookup if for example the product manager changes. The regional manager, product manager, and sales manager will be able to run a report on total products sold, in progress, and lost by region or by product using an aggregate query that reports on the quote line item quantities. Actually, let me change that. Actually, opportunity line item quantities, and then wherever the opportunity is closed won. The management here can set and track quotas against the sales manager and their team using forecasting quotas that are associated with the sales manager with certain dates. And then they'll be able to track the actuals via the opportunity and order objects as well. Customers can access a system using IDC, which returns an ID token that's validated with the registration handler. The registration handler is set up for Twitter, Facebook, and Google, so they can authenticate. Once they've logged in, there will be a login flow that will present the user with notification notifying them what data the system is collecting from them for compliance. And they will be able to do some self-service using a screen flow that will update the contact info on their contact record. When they've authenticated using OIDC, it will create a person account record for them, which is owned by the sales manager. It will be their customer record that is updated, and it will be person account. Customers will be able to then search based on a geolocation, products, search for resellers based on their geolocation. The geolocation will be accessed via the LWC that's within the browser view or within the mobile. That will then retrieve their geolocation. And then they'll be able to search for the products within that same LWC that's embedded within a screen flow for certain products that correspond to their geolocation. They will search for products using the name of the product or external IDs or UPC numbers, etc. Those products are associated with resellers via a reseller product custom object that is a junction object here. That reseller product is a mapping of what products the resellers are selling. Once the customer selects a reseller within that screen flow LWC, it will then create a quote with a status of draft for that reseller. And then there will also be a quote line item for the actual product that they're interested in. Resellers will update that quote object or quote record that's created, as well as quote line item record with what quotes, what the price, the quoted price is. And then they will then update the quote with the status of presented. There will be a record of flow that will then send the quote via email to the customer and also a PDF of the quote. Furthermore, there will be a link to the quote so that they can access directly from the customer portal. The customer can communicate with a reseller using digital engagement, like I mentioned, for a live chat. Furthermore, there's going to be chatter within the quote, and they can communicate that way using those channels. Once a customer agrees to the quote, they will update the quote with the status of accepted. That will then trigger via record or flow a DocuSign envelope that will go through the sales manager and the reseller initially as a first step. Once both have signed it, the quote, that will then be routed to the customer for their final signature. Once that's done, we'll have the agreed contract with the sale completed. Customers will be able to then access the portal using mobile device. The mobile device itself would have like the customer app, which is a mobile publisher app. The mobile publisher app gives them access to the Salesforce customer portal. And then there's an additional app, which is the health tracker app, which is on Heroku. That is for the fitness tracker data. The fitness tracker data is syncing with Salesforce using an external object via Salesforce Connect. They'll have access to this the health data using those external objects. And then those external objects are related using external lookup to the account as well as to the service appointment itself, which is later on in the requirements. Once the agreement is signed, the customers will get an invoice. The invoice is based on the envelope being signed and is sourced from the ERP. Salesforce will integrate via the ESB with the ERP with the quote data using a fire and forget pattern in CADC. ESB will orchestrate the creation of the invoice data from the ERP and the creation of a chargent order within Salesforce with an invoice PDF attached. That will then send an email to Salesforce with the chargent link for the access to the payment gateway for their access and for the immediate payment. Once they click the link, that will redirect them to the hosted payment gateway. The gateway itself is integrated with chargent. Once they've paid, there will be an auth response to chargent that will then update the chargent order as having been completed. Once the chargent order is paid, it will then create an order and the order items. The order is owned by the reseller. And then there will be the change data capture integration from Salesforce to the ERP via the ESB, and the ESB will then update the external ID of the order from the ERP system. So the ESB will update the order with the ERP ID for later integration updates. Customers are able to track the shipments of the devices from the portal using an LWC. The LWC integrates Salesforce with the ERP for any sort of time ship status updates. This will be using request reply and REST API, and the ESB will integrate with the ERP's system APIs. The source of truth for customers will be Salesforce, which will own the rights and the lifecycle of the customer records, which is a departure from the ERP using that, and we'll be migrating account and contact data from the ERP to Salesforce. And then for any updates to account contact customer data, we'll be syncing those to the ERP using change tag capture as well. Once the customer receives a shipment, the ERP will update with the order status as having been delivered, and will integrate with Salesforce and update the order status and delivery time using a remote call-in and a platform event. It will be using the external ID within Salesforce from the ERP system, which was updated in the previous step. Product managers are able to run reports on surveys. We are assuming that we are sending, whenever an order is delivered, and a survey to the customer via an email, which is leveraging Salesforce surveys. They'll then be able to run standard reporting on those survey question responses so they can then track the satisfaction. Customers are able to contact Acme Gym via phone call, which creates a voice call record within the within Salesforce that looks up to the case object. Any sort of other channels are covered by digital engagement, which creates messaging sessions for case records that look up to case records. So every contact will create a corresponding case, and then that will track the correspondence using these objects here. The support reps and the sales managers will be able to access support tickets since they are the owner of the cases, and the sales manager will own, of course, the account, and thereby also access the case using implicit sharing. Regional managers will be able to report on the support agent performance over the last 2 years using an aggregated summary object, which in this case I'm using a custom object called case performance summary. This object aggregates per agent, region, and month and creates records for each one to track their performance, and they can then report on those using standard reporting. We're choosing to do that instead of reporting directly on the cases, given the fact that the case object is a large data volume, and we're going to be splitting cases between the standard case object as well as a historical case big object. The historical case big, I'll describe the usage of that in the migration section of this. Regional managers will be able to monitor the agent workloads within the omnichannel dispatch console for the monitoring support. And then if the agent needs to raise a flag for the regional manager, they will update the status of the case to escalated. Customers can save credit confirmation not in Salesforce, but within the payment gateway using Chargent. Chargent will only store the tokenized credit card information, and that tokenized credit card information will then refer to the actual credit card information where the payment is being processed, which is within the payment gateway. Chargent transactions will be leveraged for the payment history, and then the invoice will be attached from the ERP to the Chargent transactions themselves. There is a requirement here for the last 2 years of payment history to be within the solution. What we're going to do is, as soon as the transaction is completed, move the transaction data into a big object for that accessibility that's described here, given the fact that it is such a large data volume. Okay. Moving on to the final section here, which is the training enrollment and tracking. Customers can book, trainers first enroll in the portal using that partner and training portal, trainer portal. They'll self-register, and that will then create a trainer as a person account. That training portal, once they created a user, there will be a screen flow for onboarding, and then they'll have access to a Canvas app for the actual a Canvas app for the training tracker, which resembles the same access requirement as was described earlier with the reseller. And then there will be single sign-on for them to then access the Canvas app. The tracker will integrate back into Salesforce using the OAuth token as well. Their user is set up with Salesforce Scheduler as a service resource. They'll have a service resource record created for them that will then enable them to be set up as with service appointments within the system for the customers to book sessions with them. We'll use Salesforce Scheduler availability feature for them to set their schedule for each day. And then we'll also ensure that customers can save calendar invites for themselves using the Salesforce Scheduler calendar invite feature. While the customer is being trained, there will be a service appointment attendee record there that tracks that specific customer's training. That has a reference to the fitness tracker data external object, which is the OData federated feed from the Salesforce Heroku endpoints that is enabled via Salesforce Connect. They'll be able to, the reason why we're using Salesforce Connect here is so that there is real-time access to the training data. And they will be able to set up multiple appointments with multiple different trainers using that same service appointment attendee object.